So we have the honor of joining with us from Bergenfield, Rebbetzin Pesha Neuburger. Rebbetzin Neuburger has been the Rebbetzin, a congregation based of Avraham in Bergenfield, for 30 years. She taught at Lincoln Square for 25, 30 years too. And she's one of the great Kala teachers in the world. She's taught many Kala teachers, and she's taught as well at Bruriah, Manhattan High School. Her husband, Rabbi Yaakov Neuburger, is Rosh Yeshivat Hakotel, and from Los Angeles. Her daughter, Bruriah Siegel, who teaches at Yula, is also a graduate of Bruriah, Michlala, very talented, university graduate. It's an honor to have you both.
Thank you.
So Rebbetzin Neuburger, what challenges are there in raising a daughter vis-a-vis a son? Like, what's the unique relationship a mother would have with her daughter?
So I think I was less challenged than most because she's a great daughter, but I'll encapsulate it for you. I think what people would want to hear is that how are the challenge in terms of being in the chinuch. So Bruriah was my student in 12th grade, and she's an excellent student. She was an excellent student in my class as well. She's also a very, very talented artist, and we had an unwritten deal that she was going to sit in the back, do some artwork, and get good grades, and that would be fine. And she basically drew through my classes, did very well, and I never really engaged her. And then there was one day in the middle of the year where she was following me back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I thought, wow, I finally made inroads. I finally made a dent. There's something in this lesson that really got to her, and we've made a breakthrough. And I waited till she came home that night. I was so excited to find out. And I said, Bruriah, what was it today that you were following me nonstop in the classroom? And she said, your shaitel, Ima. You have got to get a new shaitel. It looks like theater curtains. So that was always that was the challenge, that when you're in the chinuch, you will have a child who will want to do anything but. So when you have a child who excels way beyond you in chinuch, it is one of the greatest joys that life can give you.
Okay. And give us a rough moment in bringing up a daughter.
A rough moment in bringing up a daughter? She didn't give me that many rough moments. I think there were sibling rivalry moments that were very tough because I relied on Bruriah a lot. So she kind of was a second mother in certain instances. But then when she shouldn't have been a second mother, she was also a second mother. So that resulted in a little bit of turf battle. So those were the only rough times I could think of, really.
Okay. And Mrs. Siegel, I married the daughter of a Rosh Yeshiva too. And she told me on more than one occasion that she felt pressured to behave in a certain way because her mother was a Rebbetzin in the community. Her father was a Rav in the community, or Shiva in the community. So she had to be the rabbi's daughter. And there are times when she really resented it, right? You know, you can't do that. Implicit, like they're going to say the rabbi's daughter. So did you ever have those moments? And if you did, how did you deal with them?
Interesting. So I definitely at times felt like we were a little bit in the spotlight, like people were looking at us and observing. But I think a lot of times it felt like this mission that we had, and my parents really set it up. Like if we would have not from people over, then they kind of empowered us into this feeling of these people haven't experienced the Shabbos. Let's show them what it's all about. And we kind of felt like we were part of the team. And if there was someone in the shul who, I would come home on a Friday and my father would give me an address and say, I want you to go to this house and say you're here to help with the kids. Like he wouldn't give me any reasons, or I had no clue why. But so we became part of that mission. And I think because they empowered us to feel part of it, we felt like it was ours too, and we, lived up to it. We never wanted to let them down or disappoint them, but there was very little thing or telling us rules. It was always like we just didn't want to let our parents down.
Okay. Now, you grew up in a Rabbanish family. You probably know one or two girls who grew up in families like this who really struggled. Other families. Why were your parents successful, the children, as the parents of Mechanchim? As mechanchim, parents of a future generation of educators, and yet other families are unsuccessful and their children just don't get it. What's the difference, like in the upbringing, the successful? And I say that because many of the listeners are going to witness, what shouldn't we be doing?
Right. I would say two things that were really important for me. The first was intellectual honesty. My parents were always, always honest about everything. So we could ask my dad any question in the world, and it was never, that's what's been done forever. He would always show us the sources, and if it wasn't halacha, he would be straight up that it wasn't halacha. And there was always that intellectual honesty. Whenever a teacher said something that I was upset about or resented and came home, he would take the time, sit with me, go through it, and show me what was real, what wasn't real. I think that was really, really important. And the second thing that I would say is that as much as my parents feel like the entire community and probably the entire Jewish world is their family, and they will do anything for really anyone, my father and mother, up till all hours of the night, on the phone with people, running to people's houses. Our house is a free-for-all. Anyone can show up at any time. We always knew that we were the top priority, and they were willing to drop anything and everything when we needed them. So when I broke up with a boyfriend at 1 o'clock in the morning in my Sturm dormitory, my father was there within 20 minutes to pick me up, take me home, stayed up with me all night. I had a portfolio due the next day, and brought me back to Stern the next morning to drop it off. Like, we were the number one priority.
She's saying your parents were like the old Rabbanim sign, Eved La'avdei Hashem. But even though they're Eved La'avdei Hashem, that's like an animal farm. We're all equal, but some were more equal. Right? So, Rebbetzin Neuburger, what do you value most about your relationship with your daughter?
There are so many things, but if I have to, there are really so many things, but she teaches me constantly how to be an amazing mother. She is an amazing teacher. I get stopped all the time. What an amazing teacher she is. There's no nachas greater than that. But when I watch her parent, I literally, there are times I say, I wish I could do it over again and do it like she did it. For example, I could give you a million examples, but you don't have time for them. For example, Korona Pesach. We all struggled with Korona Pesach. It was very different from anything any of us have ever done, certainly in terms of the extended family gatherings we all expected. And Bruriah and her husband, but it's her creativity, he would agree with this, they decided that for Afikomen and for the entire Seder, they were going to run it that Jackie was going to take the Afikomen, and they bought a box, whatever you call it, one of those vault boxes, put it in the vault, lock it up, and they made an escape, you know, those escape the room thing, for the entire Seder. Throughout the Seder, there were clues going through so that whoever would get the combination opened first would get the afikomen. Those kinds of things, she does. She just spews them forth, both in teaching and in parenting. She is perhaps the most patient mother I know, and I certainly was not that patient, and I get that from her. I really learn from her.
And let me ask Mrs. Siegel, what do you cherish most about your relationship with your mother?
Wow, there's a lot of things. I mean, I really think it's just all the times that we've spent together, and in so many different capacities. You know, we've played a lot of Scrabble games, we've gone on a lot of trips together, we've spent days shopping together, but also I took my mom's college class. I took her college teaching class. I was her student in 12th grade. We spent a ton of time, and this was probably one of the most special times, right before I taught a course 2 years ago, which was a course that my mother teaches, and I kind of borrowed the entire thing from her. We spent the summer learning it together, and it was just an amazing experience to just learn one-on-one and hear, you know, her thought process in developing the curriculum. And I think that was definitely one of the highlights, but there are many.
So your mother says you're a fantastic mother, with prejudice. If you had, if the mothers listening, I don't know, your 2 or 3 best tips, here's how to be a fantastic mother, what would they be?
It's so hard. 3 best tips for being a good mother. Okay. One is really, I think, empathize, like empathy, just really trying to get into a kid's mind and understand what they're going through. And especially during this whole Corona thing, we've had our share of kids acting up, but to really appreciate that this is so hard for them and their whole world has been flipped around, to kind of be in their mind and just feel what they're going through, I think changes your whole perspective. So when they come home from school, it's, wow, that's really hard to listen to teachers all day. How can I help you? How can I, help you make it through? So I'd say empathy is probably key. Number 2 is to try to find your kids' kohos, your kids' strengths, and really, push them. Like I have a daughter who's artistic, so during Corona, we set up a business for her where she goes to people's houses and she brings crafts projects, and in their backyard, she'll do, crafts projects with the girls, and she feels like so good about herself. She's accomplishing something, she's doing something, and it's using all of her kohos to do that. And number 3, Ima, can you do number 3?
I'm trying to think of the things that I've watched you do as a parent. I think Bruriah, one of the reasons she's a great parent is because she gets in the trenches with her kids. She does everything with them. She enjoys doing life with them. And it's not just that she's entertaining them or she's doing X to give them a good time, but and that may be her motivation. But when she's in it, she's thrilled. She's energetic. She's effervescent. They don't feel she's doing them a favor by any means.
Okay. So it's empathy. That was listen carefully. The second one was
use their co-host.
Yeah, build strengths. It's easier to build up people's strengths and try to improve their weaknesses. And the third one is really enjoy being present and being a mother. Enjoy, I took my little Anikel out for a hike this morning, a walk with my wife. And I said to my wife, and I mentioned a few friends of mine, my age, who I work with, and I said, what would they give to have a grandchild? And what would some people give to have a child?
Right.
So Rebbetzin, it says, Bina Yisera Nitna Al Nashim. Chachmas Nashim Bansa Besa. What does that mean to you? What is the Bina Yisera that the woman has?
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure I got so many measures of it, but I think I'm gonna go back to something Bruriah touched on, and it's very important for me in child rearing and in being a teacher and being a mechanechet. Rav Dessler very famously speaks about the Nekudat HaBechira. Everybody knows what the Nekudat HaBechira is. So in my life, I invented something called the Nekudat HaChain, that there is nobody in this world, really it'd be hard to press to find anybody, any student, any child, any human being who doesn't have a Nekudat HaChain, an area where they shine in some way. And I think the wisdom of life is to find what it is, and not only to make them feel good about it and to let them build on it, but for you yourself to utilize it. When I was a young adult, you asked Bruriah about, what makes her different from the families where it didn't work so well. So I could answer, we're several generations in Rabbanos. So I was a Harlap, and I also grew up in a very strong Rabbanish family. And when I was a young adult, I think I was about to be married, and I was marrying a Rav. And I said to my father, all my friends who their parents were in Rabbanos, they all swore they would never marry a rabbi. And I'm thrilled to marry a rabbi. What made it so different for you? Why did everybody love you? Why didn't you have problems in the Rabbanos the way other people had? And my father, who is one of the wisest men I know, he should be well, he said, I was sure he was going to say, no, Pesha wasn't like that. We shielded you, etc. He didn't say that. He looked at me and he said, Pesha, if you want people to love you, ask them to help you. The people whose children, I got into medical school, I got out of jail, I bailed out of this, I bailed out of that, they have trouble looking at me. There's a lot of embarrassment. But the people to whom I turned, and I said, I have a project in the shul, I need your help with it, or I have something going on in my life, it's your expertise, I've seen you handle it well, could you help me? Those are my friends for life. And he didn't do it in order to make friends. He realized over time that because that was a natural tchuna of his, to not see himself always in the position of leadership and I should know everything, but to really gain from people's kohos, that was probably the wisest thing he did, and certainly one of the greatest wisdoms he imparted to us.
To give them sheer ownership with them.
Correct.
There's everybody, Adam sees himself, he sees all Bruriah through the prism of his own eyes. So if you allow them to sort of radiate out that prism and give them ownership, then that's fabulous.
Can I add a little bit?
Sure.
One of the things, after my mother passed away, we would go to my grandfather's house for Shabbos. My mother would for all the food, pack us up, send us in the car, and we had to do Shabbos at the house. And I always tell my students about this. I teach them about the mitzvah of Bal Tashlis, because the Sefer Achdut there says that a person who's careful not to waste will come to love everyone, right? Will become an Ohev Abrios. And it's always very jarring. Like, I'm not going to throw out my water bottle, and now I'm going to love every person. And I always tell them that I experienced this firsthand at Zadie's house, because we would sit there, and there were two things we all knew were going to happen at Zadie's house. There was going to be the most eclectic Shabbos table you have ever been to, because he invites everyone and anyone over. And we were never, ever allowed to throw out the plastic tablecloths. We had to wipe them down and save them for the next week. And I really think that those two character traits went hand in hand. He appreciated the value in everything, and what that ultimately meant is that he appreciated the value in every single person. And there were sometimes people there who others may have found very hard to enjoy being with, to find the good in them, but he always, always found the good in everyone and truly enjoyed being with every type of person.
Wow. In other words, Bal Tashlis means if we value even the most pachim ktanim in life, we're certainly going to value our relationships with other people. Yeah, very powerful. So here's a question. A lot of the listeners, I personally have a daughter who lives in Eretz Yisrael, and it's a struggle to maintain relationships long distance. And it's obvious when I speak to both of you that there's really a nafsha kshura b'nafsha, nafsha kshura b'nafsha, right? How did you maintain this relationship, notwithstanding the fact that you're 3,000 miles?
Thank God. I want you to know, I think about this all the time, because I think how in Europe, when you said goodbye to a child who was going to another shtetl, that was really goodbye. If they were going to another country, you did not know if you were going to ever see, speak, hear from them again, maybe a letter every 2 months. And I don't know how they did it. We have phones, we have WhatsApp, we have chats, now we have Zoom. One of the things that I love is that I do, the last 2 weeks I haven't done it because I was very busy with school, final grading things, but through the Korona thing, I had story time with all my grandchildren across the country at whatever. It was a little bit early for LA, it wasn't bedtime yet there, but bedtime on the East Coast, and all the grandchildren would get together, and sometimes the parents would chime in, and birthdays, we often get together on chats, but it's so important to both of us. We speak to each other pretty much every day. We try very hard to make trips. Bruriah particularly really tries several times, and Korona is different, but several times a year to come in. We try to go there during vacation. Almost all our vacations in the last few years have been to California. If you don't believe me, ask my other children. One of my daughters-in-law, whom I love tremendously, for Pesach a few years ago, she stole the afikoman. It's not her nature at all. She just grabbed it. And I said to my husband, I don't know what's up, but we're in for trouble. And when it was time to give back the afikoman, my daughter-in-law said, we would like equal time with our children, with the LA children. So we are, Baruch Hashem, blessed to have those relationships. But I think with all our children, the relationships are that important that we're all working on it. It's very conscious.
So the message is distance in kilometers or miles does not have to create distance in the heart or in the presence. Correct. Together.
And even the distance that it does create, if it's in a healthy situation like this, it just creates longing. And that's a good thing. Like we long to be together.
Okay, let me ask Mrs. Siegel. The Navi says, the prophet says that when Eliyahu comes, right, to precede the Bias HaMashiach, he's going to be Heishiv Leivavei Salbanim. And the Mishnah in Idiyah says that it seems that Avei Salbanim don't get along very well. Right? And I'm going to extrapolate, perhaps, mothers and daughters too. Why is it that so many mothers and daughters don't get along? And this is going to be the work of Eliyahu. The first work he comes is to repair these breached family relationships. You've seen a lot of mothers and daughters who don't get along. Why is that?
So I have to say that it's hard for me to answer this question because I feel that my relationship with my mother is very natural. I don't think there has been so many challenges, thank God. So it is a hard question to answer. But just in discussing it with my mother, I think what we kind of, spoke about was this idea that as a kid, you want to pave your own path. You want to find your own way. You want to discover it on your own. And as parents, we kind of feel like we figured it out already. We know how this, how this plays out, and we know what's best for our kids. And it's hard for us to let go and let them figure it out on their own because we feel like we've discovered it already, and we just want to give it to them. And so finding that balance of letting our kids go off on their own and discover for themselves, I think sometimes creates that conflict. Personally, in my life, we really didn't have a lot of conflict at all. But I think that could be part of why it's so challenging.
Okay. Rebbetzin Neuburger, the present generation is growing up in a very different world than when we grew up, with very big wins, right? Chatzkel Abramsky had a son who went off the derech. So the Maskilim used to like to poke a little fun at him. He was Rav in Europe and then in the Litha and then in London. So they once asked him, they said, why is it, so one of them said to him, he said, Chatzkel, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. He had a son who was not a Shem Torah Mitzvahs. So Chatzkel said, not when big winds blow.
So true.
I think that big winds are blowing now, right? The winds of change, right? The kids today, my grandson, he's 2 years old, already knows how to scroll on an iPhone to see the pictures. And it's accelerating, Moore's Law. How are we to be mechanech our children in such really challenging times? What advice would you give as an expert mechaneches? How do we hold on to our children when big winds blow?
So I guess I'll preface this by saying that I don't think any of us is ever confident that we know how to do that. And the example you just gave is a case in point. Who probably knew better, and it still doesn't work. And there's so much davening. Name of the game is davening. But if I want to hold on to some ideas, I would say, and I'm always going to go back to the same thing. We said about the Nekudat HaChain, and you talk about your grandchildren who can scroll up and scroll down, probably in their pocket while they're doing something else. I try to use those kochos in the discovery of the Masorah. You can scroll up and down to help me find the makor for something I remember, but I just can't place it. You're going to be able to help me quicker get it. And that tapping into their kochos for your or Klal Yisrael's agenda, I think is a very powerful thing. But I think now we've seen amazing things in the last few months where the Masorah that is so ancient has become so palpably timeless. So Shabbos has become so amazing that the respite from the news when Korona first started and the news was hounding in numbers and deaths, and everybody said, I just need that Shabbos to get a break from the news. Shabbos in general, davening gave structure in a structureless life. People saw the value of that. My husband pointed out, and I saw it was true, that those of his people who are rooted in learning, who literally their lives revolve around learning, they were much less displaced than other people. People who their entire thing is about shul and going to minyan, and the rest of it is work and other things. But the people who were really learning and had siddurim, that went on as usual. They were less displaced than anybody else. And so we see chesed, the chesed that went on. Now, it goes on in non-Jewish communities as also, but that's because they choose to do it, the kind people choose to do it. We have an agenda of chesed. We have halachos of chesed. And that meant that when Korona hit and the guy who sells flowers in my shul had no parnasa, that people automatically started to call him to send flowers to this one, to send flowers to that one, when anybody else would have forgotten him. That's because we have a Masorah that trains us to be like that. And it has become, to me, more relevant in the winds of time.
You say you're chalap. I think chalap stands for Chia Rosh Legoyle Poland.
No.
So it goes back 1,000 years of Rabbanis, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I would like to ask your daughter, by the way, the Nekudas HaChain, I think, it says Adam Nivra Yechidi.
Mm-hmm.
So the 2,000 years ago, Chazal said that every person is a one-time event. And it was mocked.
Right.
But today we know DNA, that's true.
Right.
Every person is a one-time event.
Mhm.
And you're saying the Nakuda Zayin is find the one-time event that is your child.
That's a beautiful way to say it.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask your daughter, you're living in LA, and I don't want to be pejorative, but LA does have a reputation of being a particularly, hedonistic society, right? It's filled with beautiful, New York is all about business, right? Washington is about power. And LA is about sort of looks and publicity, right? That's what I'm just quoting So how do we bring up spiritual children that have a connection all the way back to Goyle Poland, 1,000 years, right? In a society that is so materialistic. And in particular, let's talk about bringing up daughters, because this is a mother-daughter. How do we bring up daughters when Instagram, TikTok, checking the makeup videos, and how do we retain the Yiddish, the chelik alekami mal, in the sense of a society that's sort of hell-bent on crushing it?
Okay, so I'd answer two things, I think. The first is, I think that we need to stress over and over to our students as much as possible the value of privacy. And this is actually something that I heard from my mother, but that when you tell someone a secret, right, that creates a bond. And I tell that to my students all the time, that your life doesn't have to be public. You help them start to appreciate the value of keeping certain things private. Right, Rabbi Fran says it's about walking privately with God. Not everyone needs to know everything that a person is doing. Not needing that fanfare. It is a challenge for our generation, because everything we do is just everywhere right away. So I think that's a struggle, but we just kind of need to constantly reiterate it and demonstrate it. Like, I'm very careful not to ever post anything on an Instagram account, because I want my students to see that there's a value to privacy. And the second thing I think is that this culture creates a lot of self-centeredness, right? I'm always focusing on me and what I'm posting and how my life is presenting to other people. And the night before I got married, actually, you'll probably remember this, my mother said to me, I have to teach you two things. There's two things you need to learn. And I was like, this is the night before I'm getting married. So obviously this is going to be like the two most groundbreaking things my mom has ever taught me. Guess what they were? Number one, she showed me how to clean a toilet, because that was something I had never done. And apparently there's like this nozzle thing with, that goes around, and I had never seen one of these before. But the night before I got married, I was in the bathroom learning how to clean a toilet. And the second thing my mother said to me, which has really stuck with me ever since, is whenever you have a free minute, think to yourself, what's a nice thing I can do for someone else? Whenever you have a free minute, hour, second, what is a nice thing I can do for someone else? And I've really tried to, I'll tell my kids, I'll say, we're going to do softies rule now, right? We have 10 minutes in the car. What can we do that's nice for someone else? Like, can we go to a store and buy a present for a girl who just had an operation? Can we go make cookies and bring it to the police station? What can we do that's nice for someone else? And that's really that's softies rule to live by. Whenever you have a free second, think how you can do something for someone else. And I'm hoping that kind of trains them to think outside of their Dalit Amos and to think about others and not be so focused on themselves.
You're a charlap, your mother says. So, Reb Shmuel Baruch Verna, did you know him?
Of course, yeah. My husband did Shemush with him about 38 years ago.
He once told me, he said, you know what I think about when I walk in the street? And I said, what? He says, when I see somebody, I think, what could I do to help this person?
Wow, that's funny.
So it must be some type of a charlap.
Wow.
Messiah, right? So Rebbetzin, in closing, there's many young women who'll watch this, right? Tell them, this is going to sound really strange, but this is why should they have children in a generation that is so the me generation, the selfie generation, right? Why spend all that time, all that effort to give so much? Why?
So I guess, you mentioned before, our Masorah, our everything we believe in depends on passing it down. And that is the only thing that makes life worth living, is that we have a Masorah that is timeless. Otherwise, life is ephemeral, and it's here today and gone tomorrow. And our Masorah makes it timeless. There's a purpose. There's a Ribono Shel Olam who has a plan that he wants this Masorah to continue, and he wants me to contribute to it. And ultimately you have children, they're going to bring you a lot of joy. There's going to be agonizing moments. They will bring you much joy. But all of that is besides the point. The point is that they will bring joy and pride l'shem shamayim, and that's l'kach notzarnu. That's what we're about.
Thank you, Rebbetzin and Rebbetzin.
Thank you. Thank you.